Hey there, this is Bobby with the Rock Guys Podcast, and you are listening to Marv Smooth on the Pods Like Us podcast. Check him out.
Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with, at long last, I've been looking forward to this one, with Nick from the Beatles-related show Winter of Discontent. Hi Nick, thanks for speaking with me.
Hi Marv, it's good to be here.
It's great, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Been a while waiting for this one, haven't we?
I've not done anything like this, so, bear with me. I may waffle.
I think it'll be the first of many, because I know a lot of Beatles podcasters who are looking forward to this one.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, well, I'll talk as much as I can then.
Yeah. Ed Chen, he wanted to take part, but he's only just gone out of bed.
Oh, yeah, it's fair enough then. Yeah.
That's Ed from When They Was Fab, for anybody listening.
Oh.
So
one of the ones I listen to.
That's good. That's good. Other people who said, "Wow," are Kit O'Toole and Tom and Sam Wiles. They've all mentioned in passing, and Anthony Rotuno, who does the Beatles. The John Lennon one on Glass Onion.
Anthony's been very supportive. He direct messages me on Twitter sometimes to offer support, which I think is, that's excellent. People have been nothing actually other than complimentary. I'm very, very flattered.
It's an interesting one because you've got all these different shows that are related to Beatles and solo Beatles, but for the most part, there doesn't seem to be any competition, shall we say, between all the shows. They seem to be all almost like a family and supporting each other.
Yes, yeah. But they have a different take, don't they? I think the only two that are probably rivals is Mr. Buskin and the something about the Beatles guy whose name escaped me, because they obviously work together, and now they have kind of rival shows, don't they?
Yes, they do. I know what you're on about there. We won't go into more detail there.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're both excellent in their own way. So we get. I dare say everyone's a winner, really.
Yes. You've quoted an Apple act there.
And what? Everyone's a winner.
Yeah, hot chocolate.
Of course, yeah.
The infamous "Give Peace a Chance."
I need to be on my toes a bit more tonight.
Sorry, Nick. Oh dear. Shall I quit with the pop references?
No, keep going.
Yep.
Keep going.
Okay. So what's your own
spot them?
Sorry. So what's your own personal history with the Beatles then? How did you discover them, and how old were you when you first discovered them?
I'm a child of the 70s, really, not to give me age away too much. But we had my parents, even though my dad was a musician, he was a bandsman in the army, we didn't have anything like a particularly good record collection or anything like that. But we had family friends who had this. It was one of those things you aspired to. and I think now when people collect vinyl now, it's become a thing again. But they had this like a wall of vinyl records, like a long shelf. And I was fascinated with those. And in there, they had two Beatles albums. They had an original pressing, Sergeant Pepper, which was, with all the really bright colours, and the cardboard insert and all of that. And they had Let It Be in the box, and in the box was the book. And and I remember, oh my God, every time we went round, I had to look at that book. And as we all know, that was the one that was not very well bound, and all the pages had fell out. So it was in no particular order when I was looking at it. But the pictures used to absolutely just transfix me, really. And that really began my interest. And I there was a little bit of a Beatle resurgence in the 80s for obvious reasons, but I like to think I was a little bit ahead of that, because I got the red and the blue albums for a birthday, I think. And then just as I was getting into the band, John was killed.
Yeah.
Which was, when for someone you're only just getting to know, to just disappear like that, I would have been, before my teenage anyway. So it was like a bereavement of a relative or something.
Yep, same here.
It was a real shock. So, and that's really, in the end, that's what pulled me into it even further.
I think that was the first. I vaguely remember Elvis's passing, very vaguely, from back then. But John, it was very. I was that age where it did actually, because I was 10 years old just at that time. And it was strange because it affected me, because like you said, I mean, I was the same. I'd just sort of got really into them, and I was playing the albums that my dad and my mum owned, and listening to them a lot. And so I actually remember that as well, and being shocked about it. So that would be my first experience of a response to a star, or dare I say, icon passing away. Yeah,
and in such a horrific way as well. I think that was the shock of it.
Absolutely.
And from there, the first record I bought with my own money, record album, was Let It Be.
Okay.
Hoping, obviously, or expecting there'd be a box with a book in it, which of course there wasn't. No. But it's still, it's kind of my gateway into their story, and obviously it dominates my life still.
Hi, this is Katie at Bad Counsel with some good counsel. You should keep listening to Marv at Pods Like Us.
I do know that the Let It Be set, haven't they said that they're actually putting that original book in the reissue that's coming out soon?
That I haven't seen it yet. I mean, there is obviously, there's like a 5-disc set, isn't there?
Yeah.
Although I think, from what I've heard, there's a kind of weird. Isn't it one disc an EP or something?
It is, yeah. There's 4 songs on there as an EP.
Yeah, it's rather strange. But you do get, which is more interesting, I think, the original Glyn Johns mix of the album.
Yeah. I think there's 2 2 Glyn Johns mixes, actually.
Is there? Yeah. I'm just looking at the insert that came with the book. As it says here, 6-disc edition. Let It Be plus 2 CDs of outtakes, jams, rehearsals, and studio chat, plus the Get Back album, 1969, mixed by Glyn Johns. Let It Be EP,
right?
And Let It Be EP, which I don't know what that is.
So it's just the
one. From what I've heard of that, obviously, most of us have heard the bootleg of the Glyn Johns mix.
I've certainly heard that with rock on there and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, which you hear from beneath a sort of a layer of dust and fluff and multiple tape copies. So to hear it cleaned up is fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'll be looking forward to hearing that.
Me too. But saying that, I mean, it's one of those sets where you just know that people are going to say, "Oh, do you know, I was really hoping for that." It's like they can never please the fan because they'll always be, "Oh, why didn't you do an old CD of songs that they ended up doing themselves outside of the Beatles and that sort of thing?"
But I mean, to make that entertaining, though, I mean, I don't know. I haven't really got that far, but a lot of when they're doing outtakes or tracks that are listed as being, a cover version of a song or whatever, they're not, fully fledged, polished recordings, are they? So in order to make them work, I think they'd be doing a tremendous amount of post production on them and cheating. To make it listenable. So I can't see, even when you saw it on Anthology, they did a medley of their rock and roll tunes, and that was polished up and edited together to sound more considerably less ragged than it really was.
Yeah, a bit like the White Album version of Not Guilty, where that was little clips from different takes of the same song that were very cleverly and, I've got to say, expertly put together.
Yeah, I mean, you have to see it from their point of view. They're doing it for fans as well as the sort of casual listener as well, aren't they? Or people who are new to the band. They've got to please everybody, haven't they? So, and it'll be the same with the way that the TV program is put together. That's really going to be. It's got to tell a story and it's got to be entertaining.
Yeah. And some of those songs as well from the sessions, you don't get that good interpretations of. So, like when Paul's doing the piano for Backseat of My Car in the background, that's all it is. There's nothing more to it. It's just him just there doodling away on this tune that is stuck in his head that he can't quite finish. And that's all that it is. You haven't got fully fleshed out versions of a lot of these songs. And some of them, like the cover versions, like you said, you've only got like John will go through a song for 30 seconds to a minute or something, and then go, now whatever, what's next? What we're doing now? And there's a lot of that going on in there as well. Yeah,
it's a little bit of word association, where someone might say a phrase and someone then, sings a line from it. They pick that up and then it gets put down again, and it's quite staggering the number of songs they have in their repertoire.
Yeah, absolutely.
They all know that's what they have, is this encyclopedic knowledge of material that they can just pull out just like that, which is it's a unique quality. I don't really know of a lot of other bands that work that way or have that kind of a relationship.
No, I do know a band that I used to be in. We used to have this thing where I don't know if it was just us that did it, but we used to have this thing where we'd find a group that we want to cover a song by, and the lead guitarist used to just say to me, right, off you go, learn the entire album and come back. And I'd be like, oh, okay. So I'd go away and I'd learn an entire album, and then I'd only learn it so that we'd do one or two songs off that album by that band. But I think he was basically pushing for us to be better, to stretch ourselves basically and better our abilities. So if you're only trying to learn one song, but then again with the Beatles as well, you got the thing where they said, didn't they, they learned that much material so that if they were on stage and a band was on before them and they came up with a song that they were going to do, they'd just sort of go, do you know what, we'll take that out and we'll put this one in. And they were able to do that. So I think that's where that comes from with the guys, where they had that knowledge from back in the late 50s, the early 60s. So they had those songs that they could fall back on, that they'd replace a song in the set with whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, I had read a lot of the social media postings and some of the groups and stuff.
Yeah.
where you do find it's sort of often when I'm looking at something and one of these posts will come out of the blue that answers a question I had, which is, it just seems to be like amazing timing. But one of the things that someone had posted was how the set worked at Hamburg. I forget which club, probably top 10 or something like that. And they worked from, I mean, if you're playing in bands, you know this, you do. I mean, these days you have to do 3 hours. That's what's expected. And it used to be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But they would do an hour, 7 o'clock, hour and a half to 8:30, half-hour break. No, it was an hour set. I got it wrong. Let me start again. So 7 o'clock to 8, half-hour break, 8:30 to 9:30, half-hour break.
10 till 11.
10 till 11, half-hour break. 11:30 to 12:30, half-hour break. You see what I mean? So it will go on then till I think about 2:30.
Yeah.
So they were doing something like 7 sets over the course of the night, which absolutely must be exhausting. I mean, what it must do to your fingertips, let alone anything else, and your voice. You know, it's quite amazing. I mean, they were young, and there's a lot of adrenaline involved in that. But and I know there was some of that was chemically
other substances.
Yeah. It's still amazing that they were doing that, and they were trying not to repeat themselves the whole way through.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's the famous. I'm not sure whether it's completely true or not. The famous story of Ringo coming in for the late sets, and they'd throw blues numbers in there as well.
Yeah. They'd slow it down towards the end, wouldn't they? Which is, again, that's reading your audience, I suppose. When everybody stopped dancing and they're all just sitting in the booths all drunk, it probably suited the environment they're in.
Well, they're probably too drunk to get up and dance along to the fast numbers.
Absolutely. I mean, the other fascinating thing, I covered it in one of the shows when we were talking about the 1960 tape that they made. Several tapes around Paul's house, and they were so. I mean, that's the band that went to Hamburg.
Yeah,
that rough and ready sound is what went to Hamburg with when they finally recruited Pete. So that's what they would have sounded like when they first came out. And in fact, they weren't embarrassed by that because they shared that with friends.
Yeah.
So they had, that how they developed, you can see from that's their starting point, which is amazing because they obviously, have made a quantum leap while they were there.
Yeah, they did.
I'm Agent Scott. And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And we're from the Spy Hards Movie Podcast. That's right. And you are listening to Pods Like Us, the podcast that has a license to thrill.
Well, I mean, that touches on what I put on the notes there, where basically it's incredible because you can actually see how they grew creatively and personally through those very few years that they were together. They grew more than a lot of bands can probably grow through 20, 30 years nowadays.
It's a hot house, isn't it? I think they probably spent every waking hour with each other for a good many years. So they grew together in that environment, and they're still, when you get to January '69, they're still feeding off that. They're still in that bubble. So there's everything's self-referential. They quote their own songs at each other.
They do.
They always talk about things that only happened within their circle, or people they know from within their circle, and it enables me to make a reference to something, and I'm finding that I can because it is so insular, I can find a way of telling their whole story. It's almost in flashback because they keep referring to the past all the time.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's
so the growth of them as artists. I mean, even during, as they go along, so they've still got that knowledge that they had and the songs that they learnt from back in those days of Hamburg and the bars. But throughout the years, even in these sessions, the Nagra reels, you can actually hear them doing songs that are later as well. So one of them will start a Dylan song, and they all have that love of Dylan, and they'll all join in with each other when they'll go into a Dylan song. So even
John
throughout the years, there's more stuff.
John clearly knows I Shall Be Released on that, which is a Basement tape, I think, at the time.
Oh, God, yeah, yeah.
And but when George plays that on the first day, Johnny's playing along with him. So he's listening. He's still studying music,
Yeah, and they're still quoting from later Motown songs that weren't playing back then, that have been since they were recording the cover versions and the old Beatles albums. So they'll start doing songs that are post that period. So they're definitely taking in the music throughout the years as well while they're together and doing albums.
Yeah,
because it's all there.
Yeah, they were part of the scene. They were at the clubs all the time, weren't they? There was. I mean, what did home life have to offer you, really? Back in those days, apart from the telly, which was off most of the day anyway, wasn't it? So you had a social life. You went round each other's houses, and you went out to places and did things.
But even then, with the television, you mentioned in your show where they'll appear in the morning and they'll say, "Oh, I watched this on the television," and they'll share that that people watch the same programs.
Yeah,
and John will start quoting from songs that he heard in the previous night's Top of the Pops or something.
Yeah, that was an eye opener, because if you look, you can obviously get the listings. It's quite easy to find the listings for the previous day's telly and things like that, and in that, looking at the Top of the Pops edition that was there, you could see who had appeared. And lo and behold, the next day they're running through Obla Di Obla Da, and what else they are. Sabre Dance.
That's the one that jumps out at me. Yeah,
they're all songs that appeared on the previous night's television. So it's really interesting. You're actually in there with them. You know what I mean? It's that you can get inside their thoughts and their what's influencing what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Looking at as I say, I haven't put out the third season, which is going to be January the 6th, but that's, to my ears, quite strongly influenced by the fact they've all watched Cream on their farewell concert on the television the previous night. Because that's the first time they start jamming kind of endlessly.
That's cool. That's cool that they're being inspired then by
even
something
if it's
that's
subconsciously now. They think, let's see what's contemporary, and I think they always did have an eye on that. But also with an aim to be, on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
So, what did John say? That they were in the crow's nest. They were on the ship. We're all on the ship, but they were in the crow's nest, and they could see what was coming before everyone else. Yeah. Something like that.
Actually, if somebody's after a subject that's not been covered, that would be a fascinating dive into the very short but inspirational career of Cream.
Yeah, I mean there are some documentaries, but that's an interesting. I mean, Eric Clapton's career is peculiar up to that point anyway, because he seemed to be quite reluctant to be successful, didn't he? He kept bailing out of everything he did that was successful. He pulled away from. So
I was speaking with Jason Krupa and Ken Womack the other week for my other show, the George Harrison show, and I was saying how in a way, it's strange with Eric because he's there being the, I'm the, I'm all for the blues. And I said, but there he is playing with what he even said himself was a pop band with the Beatles. And that was the actual phrase that he used. But he's always there talking to the four of them and jamming with George and with John, so there's a sort of dichotomy there with John, with Eric, I mean.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think he was very much a little bit elitist at the start, I think, because he thought he didn't want to know you if you didn't know who, Robert Johnson was or something like that.
Yeah.
But then again, he didn't mind. That I think actually has a lot to do with. Here we go. One of the early episodes, Charlotte Martin, who was his girlfriend.
Yep.
Who, much like the way that Yoko would have done with John, or in fact Patty did with George to an extent, widened his social circle to include artists and classical musicians or whoever, and broadened his horizons. And so maybe that's what got him out of his little narrow view for a little while.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happened.
I think so.
Yeah, the same thing happened with Paul and Linda, essentially, because because through Linda he became part of the Eastman family, and that changed the way that Paul would be from then on.
Yes, there is a change in him.
Yeah.
From that point, I think when he's no longer the playboy man about town. I think she supplied him with a kind of ready-made family, which he seemed to need. I mean, he's from a very close family as it is.
Yeah.
And I think he wanted one of his own. And she gave him that, and obviously it definitely worked for the both of them, didn't it? So
yeah, I mean, Paul always seemed to have that enormous family that were always there. Whereas I don't think John had the same sort of family background for certain. I don't think that he did as Paul. If you look at
his short life, really. Yeah. And then you look at the events of it. It's turmoil from start to finish, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one kind of you can understand how that would affect a person. It's very damaging for a child, that kind of instability. But yeah, it definitely had a long-lasting effect on his personality, which he never really got the chance to resolve, really.
No, because he's always thrown between. He's either with his mother or he's with his auntie or somebody else. So he's always thrown, as we say, we know this phrase, don't we? He's thrown from pillar to post. So he's got no actual stability there that's constant. Whereas Paul always had that stability with his father and his mother before she died, and with Mike, his brother. There was always that there, and then the Robins and all the other parts of the McCartney clan and all that. So Paul always had that, whereas John didn't. And even George had that to a degree with the Harrison family as well. They were quite large and always family-based.
And Ringo's family.
And Ringo as well,
with his stepdad, I think, they did had a tremendous influence on him. That was a very doting family as well. As I say, I think what it created in John, and you see that with a number of some of the biggest stars we have had this gaping sort of emotional void that needs to be filled with love and adoration, and that's what they crave, and that's why they pursue this, show business.
But that's also why they create this music, because that comes from that need as well. They're actually putting into their music that need that they're after.
Yeah. Yeah, even though it's a craft, there's a large part of sort of self-examination in John's work, even when it's when it's cryptic, isn't it? Even when we looked at one of the songs he does in this is Dig a Pony, isn't it? And he's still some of the lines in that are self-reflective.
Yeah.
Even in the chorus when he's singing "All I Want Is You," that's obvious what that is.
Yeah.
So there's he betrays himself even unsuspectingly, I think, when he's trying to be obscure.
So, hey, this is Tim from Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to the smooth, dulcet tones of Marv on Pods Like Us.
After the Beatles ended and he went to the solo career, Yoko pushed him more to that, though, didn't she? She was saying to him, make it more self-referential and about yourself, and stop with the hiding behind metaphor and just say what you want to say.
Yeah. Which I think one of the other podcasts said this, that that's not a bottomless well, is it? It's just and the amount of, again, it's a kind of a trope, isn't it? I think that a lot of acts in there, maybe their third album or something, becomes about what it's like to be famous. Look at Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
They run out of ideas and they start actually talking about what it's like to be them.
Yep.
And then they do that repeatedly. So
Dark Side of the Moon is about them, and Wish You Were Here, that's about them. Animals is about them, and The Wall is about them. Yeah.
And the Final Cut repeats the same thing again.
Yes.
So you begin to get the sound of a barrel being scraped. So I think even he realised that when he tried to do something more sort of overtly political. But because I'm pretty sure that the politics side of everything came from John.
Yeah.
That wasn't, political statements weren't necessarily what Yoko was known for. She was known for those sort of whimsical artistic statements. But a song like Revolution was written before he even met Yoko. So he was dipping his toe in that particular pond before he met her. But it was her influence that made it more whimsical events like the bedding and planting acorns and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, she was more of an ideas person. So a lot of the things that she would come up with, the slogans, would be based on the politics of the time. And there's no doubt in that she probably had the same leanings, but she would always think of it in the case of, I'll come up with a phrase like, give people make love, not war, and things like that. They would be I'm trying to think.
War is over if you want it.
War is over if you want it. That's the one I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is hers, but it's just that. But that is just something that is of its time that she thought. Yep. Whereas I don't think that she could probably I don't think she could probably write an entire song around that lyric. I'm not sure. Do you know what I mean? I think she's got that one line, and then it's a bit like the middle eight from Paul's "Live and Let Die" with Linda, where she's written a great, middle eight, but I don't think she could have written in the entirety of "Live and Let Die."
Well, yeah, it's horses for courses. I was going to say. I think really, that they're quite. I quite like sort of 1968 John and Yoko. Some of those interviews in my episode 1 they're quite funny and they're quite quirky. Well, the one that tickles me the most in that is Yoko's talking about something quite intellectual about paper, and she likes a heavy weight of paper that. I forget what she's making it a metaphor for. But John feels the need to chip in and he goes, and you can only fold it 8 times. And it's like, it's the only thing he knows about paper. And it was like,
dear.
what's that got to do with anything? But he felt he had to say something.
It's like she was rambling and he was trying to bring the conversation back.
Yeah,
Really?
no, it was.
Oh,
I felt like he thought he hadn't said something for a little while, so he thought he ought
as
to come
well,
out with
yeah.
something.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear. So, wow, we've been waxing about this, haven't we? So,
I told you I waffle.
I'm fine with that. Everyone likes a good
I
waffle.
can't keep it tidy. That's why I have to write everything down. I couldn't sit and do, and I can sense when people are doing podcast recordings and they're doing it kind of just off of very rough notes. And I would be so rambling if I did that. I have to be quite scripted. So
That's a later question, thanks.
Giving away my secrets there, but even when I'm doing a commentary, it is scripted. I'm not going, oh, I've just done. Well, there are occasional ones. I do inserts where I'm editing and I've gone, oh, I've missed something, and those aren't scripted, but the rest of it is. Otherwise, I'll just meander along.
I do pickups occasionally with people. If I'll be listening in editing, or listening back to a show, and I'll think, oh, I could have asked them that, and then I'll contact them occasionally. And go, do you just mind a quick half an hour?
Smoke and mirrors, isn't it? See, people don't know what goes into these things, honestly.
They don't. Oh God, who of us did before we started this? Who knew what was involved in making a podcast? Really?
Yeah. Well, I didn't. So I tell you how I got this came about, really.
Okay.
It became a podcast idea during lockdown. But initially I was doing some writing, trying to, whether it was going to turn into anything I published or anything, but I was doing a kind of a almost like an Agatha Christie kind of thing about what happened to Paul's bass.
Okay.
During these sessions. And that's when I started listening through the tapes. But then I realized if you're trying to write the Beatles, they talk in a very distinct way. And they've each got their own kind of voice. And it's not, there's an awful lot of cliched Beatles impressions, of which I do many. But to find their voice, I really needed to listen through the whole thing. And I thought, if I need to do research, why don't I start making notes? And then from that, it became, well, why don't I share that?
Yeah.
So that's where it came from. It was a sort of joining the dots from there to there to there. And in the end, out comes this. So, as I say, it is scripted, but I like to have a format that's sort of recognisable, and that's kind of from probably episodes 2 and 3. That's probably established itself, which is like you do a section of the audio and you go through it and you try not to make it. Because you could parody this. You could say, I'm going to have a cup of tea. That's John having a cup of tea. 2 sugars. Yeah. He's having 2 sugars in his tea. So you could parody it like that. I'm trying not to make it that obvious, but where you can't clearly hear things, I'll interpret them, or I'll summarise what's actually happening, because it isn't always obvious. They're talking about things, but they're doing something at the same time.
John notices Paul's playing the piano. Are you playing the piano, Paul? Yes.
Yeah. So there's a danger of it becoming that. I hope it doesn't. I've begun to leave longer sections and then discuss in a longer chunk as I go through, so that it's not quite as repetitive and I'm not interrupted so much. But
I think it's fascinating because you'll pick up on something on the tapes, and then you'll do a deep dive into that specific person or that specific song or the effect that they're looking for and whatever. And I think that's fascinating. Yeah.
The aim was to have maybe 2 or 3 like feature parts to it, where you'd basically write. It's a sidebar, like in a book, isn't it? where you can talk about the history of it. And I noticed in the Get Back book, they do something like that. They have to explain what they're talking about. So they've used sort of brackets and italics to, this person is blah, 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 producer of whatever. So that they can, put a context to it. And also, it's good to know what else is going on in the world and what other music is circulating and all of that. And the equipment's interesting to me because I'm a musical nerd. So
Same.
I really enjoy. I can give you a little spoiler here that they're again. Well, if you haven't heard the series, the one of the first things that I noticed that hadn't been mentioned in any of the books is Paul's bass being strung right-handed.
Yes, yeah, you did. That's true.
Which is, well, I suppose people just went past it, but he's a left-handed player. Why would his bass be strung the wrong way? And it's interesting because it sets in motion a chain of events that leads to him losing his first bass.
Yeah.
Because he has to swap it out while the other one's being restrung. He clearly likes I'm listening to the sixth now, and he clearly likes playing the 1963 model better than the old one because he doesn't stop noodling away on it for much of the first sort of half of the day on the sixth. As soon as he picks it up, he's playing very fast runs on that. So it's obviously, I think it's easier to play or feels more comfortable or whatever, or more familiar even. But he puts that 1961 bass down to switch to piano to play Maxwell Silverhammer, and it's never seen again.
But it's interesting that because so he'll play the 63 Hofner, which he says is a better bass than the first model that he had, but he doesn't play the Rick.
No,
the Rickenbacker, he doesn't play
it
that.
It might be to do with size. I don't know.
Maybe.
Because I'm actually a bass player myself, but I'm not a huge chap. And if you're singing, the way you've got to stand with your arms that far apart, it's kind of uncomfortable in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that, or it could just be it's part of the image. I mean, you did get the impression that they did this stripping back of the instruments, and eventually Paul does that with the Rickenbacker as well, doesn't he? But it was almost that was they're going to be their sort of stage look. They had the maple drum kit, and they'd all strip the finish off their guitars. It's a thought. But Paul seems to have gone with the violin bass because that's how people know him, I think. Or it's light and comfortable.
To pull the curtain away, I'm just looking over at my Fender Jazz at the moment.
Oh, very nice.
So I don't know why I'm even bothering to ask this question. So why this subject? Because so for people listening, Winter of Discontent. Nick is working through what are called the Nagra reels, which
we didn't explain that.
We didn't explain it, did we? No.
You'll have to do an introduction.
So what happened was when they were they were filming themselves going through these sessions about 6 to 8 weeks after they'd finished the White Album, and those sessions were all recorded, but they were recorded in a film studio, which was very cold. It was it started on the 2nd of January after New Year's Day, I believe, and I think it is 30 days, isn't it? I remember that because I remember I used to have the bootleg CD set that's called 30 Days, which is enormous, which is technically the Nagra reels, but sort of.
I've got a big box of discs that I'm working through, because you can physically see how many there are. It's quite, as you realise how big a task you're on,
Absolutely.
But it's that's the story of it, that they'd announced that they were going to be playing live shows in November, I think, something like that. But I think John's drug bust managed to put the mockers on that.
Yes. Yep.
So they didn't really get themselves back together until January. And then from that point, it's peculiar that they hadn't sat down and worked out what their plan was. They invested, recruited a film crew, a sound engineer. They've got all these people on the payroll, and no clear idea of where they're going.
And the wrong hours as well.
Yeah. Well, they weren't going to pay night rate, were they?
Because trying to get musicians to work from in a 9 to 5 setting will not work. We'll just say that's not going to work.
They struggle. They do struggle getting in. I think if Paul travelled on public transport, I know it's the new Get Back book says he did. He only did it the first day, because on the second day you'll hear George saying, "Oh, I saw some guys looking at your car."
Yeah.
So he drove in that day.
So that would have probably been the Aston then that he had at that point.
That was the Aston, yeah, because Kevin Harrington said he used to get a lift in. So,
Okay.
That's another one of those little myths that. But Paul did travel places by public transport. He used to get the bus in St John's Wood. And her name's, I'm just racking my brain for her name. Miss Odell, I've forgotten her first name.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Used to get the bus with him. So, it was known for him to use public transport, but I don't believe in this, particularly this period, he was doing that, because he started to arrive early from after the first day.
G'day. This is Matty C from the Astros Fantasy Football Podcast, way down in Australia. And we love getting to listen to Marv meet new podcasters from all over the world here on the Pods Like Us podcast.
Well, you've already explained why you've picked this subject, as you've explained how initially you were looking at the story of the missing bass, and that led to you going into this in more detail.
Mm-hmm. I'm hoping I might uncover it. I don't think I will.
Oh, let's hope so. One of these days, I want you to actually find the original.
I'm quite enjoying the detective work, though, of it. I think it's a fascinating part of the whole thing.
So from there, you are basically dissecting the sessions bit by bit. So you will listen to the tapes, and then you'll respond accordingly. Like I said earlier, you'll pull out of that and then describe in detail certain areas, like people who are involved. So you've gone into the histories of Michael Lindsay Hogg, Glyn Johns, and these other people who are involved. I think that's a good description.
Yes, that is. Yeah. I give sort of personal histories of those people. I do some song analysis.
Equipment analysis,
and what because they're all using. They've had a whole new load of new equipment delivered. So that's, to me, that at least that's interesting, because it's part of what makes them sound the way they do.
Yeah. Well, they've got new amplifiers to get used to as well, haven't they?
Brand new ones, yeah. Which is why the first couple of days, the guitars sound pretty crappy. Really,
yes.
It takes them a little while to settle in.
Yeah, because they're not used to the controls on those amplifiers and how they work.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's a little nugget.
Okay.
Which I think is interesting. It's just something I thought of then when we're talking about the amplifiers. When you see and you'll see it again in the Get Back documentary when it's out, when the police arrive.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. When the police arrive, when they're playing the rooftop concert, the received sort of wisdom is that the amps are cut. But that's not actually the case, because what George is doing when he reaches behind the amp, he's not switching it back on, he's turning the tremolo setting up. What's the amps haven't cut off. What's happened is, which is quite funny in a way, that John's seen 3 policemen arrive at the top of the stairs, and he's only just had a drugs bust, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So he immediately stops playing. He kind of like, oh crap. That's what's really happened there. They like to tell it that the amps were cut, but as you know, with valve amplifiers, you can't just pull the power on them; they don't come back to life that quickly.
No.
So it's just the fact that John saw the police and panicked.
Yeah.
So there's my little bit of insight.
Yeah, you have to treat valve amplifiers with a lot of respect, people.
Yes. Yeah, especially those. That was, you say 80 watts from a valve amplifier is, well, have you been in a room with 100-watt amplifiers and they're on full tilt? It's the loudest thing you've ever heard in your life.
Absolutely. Wow. So actually, we'll go to this bit. So it's something that I'm not sure if it's just me that thinks this, but I've always wondered if a lot of people not in the know about the Beatles, or just like, know of the Beatles and have a sort of like passing interest, I'm wondering if they misunderstand the whole Let It Be situation, because of the fact that there was such a long gestational period between the actual sessions to the album coming out of Let It Be itself. I think people get the wrong impression that it's the last album, and that's why they thought that situations were difficult and people were, because they think of it as the album that broke the Beatles, where in truth, it took over a year between them finishing the sessions to the album coming out, during which time they'd recorded an entire album.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the way it was edited originally as a film, it's very much influenced by the fact that the band are now split up. So that's what they focused on. Yeah.
Yeah. And the notes that they were given to Michael Lindsay Hogg, the director, in return, to tell him, I think they were based on their own thoughts that 13, 14 months later, how they were at that time, as opposed to if the film had been done a year earlier, it would have been completely different.
Yeah, had they released it pretty much straight away, you'd get probably the story that you're going to get looking at that trailer, which is it's a will they, won't they story of will they get onto a stage and make a performance.
Yeah,
that's basically what the tale that they're telling, and there's drama and setbacks along the way, and to an extent that was the kind of story that Michael Lindsay Hogg was trying to tell.
Yeah.
But the way it was, I think it was quite, maybe the original cut was a bit more easy to follow. It didn't really tell a story, did it? The original film, it was just the thing that it's lacking, and you realise it now looking at the trailer, is that here I am with however many, nearly 80 hours of audio, that he didn't use any of that as a voiceover for any of to join all the scenes together to make it make sense. And that seems like a glaring omission, because there isn't really, the film in itself doesn't make a lot of sense. But it ends on a high with the rooftop.
Yeah.
But the rest of the time they appear to be just moping around.
But then again, we've all been in bands where you have a rehearsal and you're there for 3 hours, and 1 hour is spent actually doing the music, and the other 2 hours is spent chatting about what you've watched on television or films that you've seen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the sources for anyone who's interested in this as well, but one of the sources for me is Doug Sulpy's book, which is called Drugs, Divorce and the Slipping Image, which is the first real serious analysis of all these audio tapes. And it's not necessarily a fault, but he looks at it from a point of view of these listening to these rehearsals as if they're performances, and then he critiques them as being, poor quality or unenthusiastic or whatever. But he's missing the point. Rehearsals are rehearsals. They're not really meant to be heard by the likes of you and I. And as you'll know, the first 4 or 5 times you ever go at a song, it's a car crash.
It is. Yeah.
And then suddenly everyone remembers what they're doing and it all comes together. But yeah, it's it can be, even if you, I mean, and they're not even learning other people's songs. They're making them up from scratch.
Yeah. So they're writing the song the night before or something, and then they'll come in the next day and start playing it.
Yeah.
And
so
then,
they'll run through it.
Yeah.
And then, one thing that they noted about themselves, because if you imagine, they would never have actually had to do this before.
No.
They wouldn't have sat down and learned a whole body of material when they were talking about 14 songs or something. That was the number they had in their head, wasn't it? From scratch, before they've even committed them to tape. They're just, they have to go over and over and over them and make arrangement ideas and develop them. They've never done that. They might have done it with 1 or 2 songs when they were having a studio session and they get brought one in, but they wouldn't sit there and work through a large chunk of material. So they're setting themselves a task they've never had to try and do before. And they haven't established a working method for it. And that's where it starts to unravel.
No, because the earlier period, so with Please Please Me album, those songs would already have been there that they played, even the original songs. I mean, like I Saw Her Standing There, that would have been from a year or 2 earlier. They were all songs that they're all used to. So they could actually go in and then record it in one session because they already knew those songs.
On Please Please Me, you've got 8 originals, haven't you?
Yep.
4 of which are the A's and B sides of the singles, which leaves 4. I Saw Her Standing There, they were playing at Hamburg. So ask me why it was the other one they did. But so that leaves 3 relatively fresh new songs.
Yeah.
But now they're trying to do in basically a sort of 2-week, 3-week period. At one point they say 20 or 30 songs, don't they? Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
And it's more sophisticated now. They're making more complex arrangements. Rock and roll has evolved. If you look at the arrangements on Hard Day's Night, for instance, George's guitar parts on there, he's just basically just strumming along, isn't he, through the majority of the songs?
Yeah.
It's being led by John's acoustic, and he's basically just, what would you call it, comping, wouldn't you, in the jazz term?
Yes.
He's basically outlining the chords. There's not a lot of songs that are more technical than that. But by 1969, they've got the bar's been raised quite a bit of what you need to be putting into a successful song.
Hey, it's the boys from Soft Spoken, and we are so glad that you are listening to our new friend Marv and his podcast, Pods Like Us.
Yeah, we were recently on the show for a couple of episodes, and we really enjoyed it. And if you'd like to catch a little bit more of us with all the raunchiness and sauce-based humor that you're used to, feel free to check us out on our show. But in the meantime, keep enjoying Pods Like Us with Marv.
We enjoyed talking with Marv as much as we hope you enjoy listening to him.
Now back to the show.
But they're pushing themselves in a way there, because so you've got the Please Please Me, and then by the time they get to like Beatles for Sale or somewhere like that, the albums aren't being made so quickly as they were. So each time that they make a new album, they've got longer to make the album, essentially. Yeah. So they're not going in with a large bunch of like things that they've not done. the taking time over those songs. I mean, when you get to things like Sergeant Pepper's, you've got ridiculous length of periods where you'll have a song that's there, and then 2 months later, 3 months later, they'll think, oh, do you know what? I'll just add a whistle to this song, or I'll add this to that song, you know. So you haven't got that. It's almost an impossible thing in a way, where they're trying to go back to something that almost didn't really happen. They never had that period where they would suddenly have to have those songs, you know. Yeah,
that's the first brick wall they've run into, to be honest. Their working method is to learn the arrangement of the song.
Yeah.
Now, in even the previous year, it was quite easy for them to get the rhythm part for the song, the drums, the bass, and a guitar or a piano, and record that. You've got the whole structure of the song there. Now we can add an orchestra or the lead guitar or lots of backing vocals and all of that. But now they've got to do everything at once.
Yeah.
So what's holding them back quite early on, and probably leads to Paul's frustration with George, is they have to wait for George to work out his part, which means going over the song over and over and over again until he gets something.
Yeah.
So they haven't had to do that before. Well, not for an awful long time, and probably not at all. They'll have worked out a song structure, recorded it, and then listened back to the tape, and he could work out a part.
Yeah.
But now they're driving themselves a little bit mad, and it's taking time, and it's becoming frustrating. So and there'll be lots of that. Half of the problem, I think, then is that Paul is rushing George by suggesting, do this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that causes resentment with George, because sometimes he has ideas that get ridden over, you know. I mean, for instance, as they're going through, just before they have the argument on the 6th, in Don't Let Me Down, Paul is trying to think, in the second verse of the I'm in Love for a First Time verse, Paul is trying to do an answering vocal of some kind. He can't think what it is yet. But he pushes and pushes this idea. And at one point, George goes, why don't we just play something like the bass and the guitar together?
Yeah.
And Paul ignores him. And that's exactly what they settle on in the end.
It is.
So they waste all that time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you've mentioned before about other times where George will do something and they'll go away from that, and eventually that is actually what they end up doing.
Yeah,
a lot of the
it's
time.
like your wife will often tell you.
Yes. The wife is always right.
You've just come back to me with the idea I gave you an hour ago.
My mum used to say that my stepdad, she used to do this thing where she used to say that eventually he would do what she ended up suggesting, because she'd turn it around and make it think that he'd thought it in the first place.
Yeah, maybe George should have tried that approach. But he does he sows the seed. In fact, there is another example of that where Paul finally comes up with an idea that at the end of I kind of edited it around that, but I can't remember what it was that George makes a suggestion right at the start.
Was it
the other way around, I think. I think Paul makes the suggestion. It's the other way around. The lead-ins to All Things Must Pass, which aren't in a normal sort of rhythm. They're in an odd length meter, so Ringo can't drum through it. And I think Paul says right at the start, he says, you play that bit by yourself. And they go endlessly trying to fix it until George goes, maybe I'll just play that bit by myself. You know, and it's so they're equally guilty of doing it, that they don't really listen to each other. But yeah, I kind of feel for him, because I think this is, after being cut loose for a couple of months, this is like going to spend Christmas with your parents, and you have to, the old hierarchy returns, doesn't it? The old pecking order.
I think that's something that carried on with Paul, though, for a long while, because I get the impression that he was like that with Wings, and that's probably what infuriated people like Henry McCulloch.
I hear that, yes.
Where Paul would, where Henry would be there, and he used to be someone who used to he would work on things, and Paul would just say, "Oh God, just do this," and then he'd show Henry what to do. And I think that Paul carried on with that for quite a while, definitely into the solo era. When, you know, as soon as he went out of that and they went into like Tug of War, I think he allowed people to do what they were known for doing, and that's the fact that they were there in the first place. Whereas during the Wings period, I think Paul carried on with that, almost telling people how this song should sound and what this part should sound like.
But if you listen to the way that he works on those tapes, it's very efficient the way that he does that.
Yeah.
Even though it's quite dominating, he just basically takes you through the song from start to finish, and he knows everything that he wants to do in his head. So we'll say, right, and the drums do this at this point, and then he sings the next line. He go, then you play this, and then, you know, why don't you just play a bit of guitar over that part, and then, oh, right, okay, now we do a bit where it slows down, and all of these kind of things. But he steers them through, and everyone, he teaches the band all at the same time.
Yeah.
And we spend an awful lot of episodes on All Things Must Pass, where George teaches everybody one at a time. Which is quite laborious. But yeah, the trouble, the way Paul works is he's efficient and he gets things done.
Yeah.
But he tramples on everyone's creativity.
Absolutely. But in saying that, though, at the same time, I'm about to, you know, a lot of us do this. I'm about to quash the well-known saying about Ringo Starr with his drums. You know, that's a load of crap. Ringo, fantastic drummer. He was the right drummer for the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because I'm about to say that the thing is that Paul, he needed Ringo in a way, because Ringo was a damn sight better drummer even than Paul is now, because Ringo was able to do things that Paul, even himself, he will say, I can't do that. He will admit to certain things that he can't do, because he can't do a swing beat that well. He's actually said that, whereas Ringo is an incredible swing player and has a great feel to that.
Yeah, but it is the feel.
Yeah,
it is the feel. You could see it in the playbacks to Get Back, even in that sneak peek. Something I noticed: everyone in the control room when Get Back's playing, and everyone's hearing this, and it's the rhythm of it.
Yeah.
And I've been at a jam where someone's called that song out, and the song runs away with you. You need someone. It needs to be such a grounded, like a real swinging feel to that kind of marching rhythm. That if you try and do it, it doesn't work. So that whole song is held together by that feel, that drum pattern.
Yeah, because there's a lot of Beatles songs where you'll listen to them and you'll think in terms of the drums. And if Ringo wasn't such a good drummer, you wouldn't have that. So you wouldn't listen to Rain and think, oh, the drums in Rain or the drums in Ticket to Ride. If he didn't have that ability as a drummer, that would not jump out to you.
Yeah, it's all about context, isn't it? I mean, if you listen to his contemporaries when they started, and Chris Curtis in the Searchers, or who was it in the Pacemakers? Freddie Marsden in the Pacemakers, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
and all those guys, they've all got a kind of jazz influence, and the same with Charlie Watts, even, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
Is they play a very kind of light style, but it's very loose. And what you got with Ringo was that he was a big hitter. If you see things like the Washington concert, I was looking at, I think it was on that, might have been on that thing I watched this morning. I watched Beatles Complete this morning, and they play Please Please Me on there, and when he goes to, there's a cha-cha section in the middle, and there's a woman in the crowd drumming along, waving her arms about, because it the way he played is very modern. It's a very, like, with the dampening and the way that he tuned his drums and everything. This is kind of hard but very clear, crisp kind of a sound.
Yeah.
With the emphasis on the thud of the bass drum and all of that, and the way it was recorded. He did a lot for the sound of the instrument. He's not by any means, Jeff Porcaro or anything super technical like that, but that's not the point. That was not what it was there for.
No. I mean, there's a reason why he was friends with people like Keith Moon and John Bonham, because they looked up to him and they were inspired by that style of drumming that Ringo was using.
Yeah, it's just cleaner and clearer. There was a lot of the sort of the jazz stuff, the loose stuff. Right? It's hard to explain, but a lot of that, everything on the ride cymbals and that solidity of his playing, I think, was very influential.
Yeah. Do you think that I'm coming to this one now about the amount of material that George had? Do you think that was something that could slightly have irritated John, perhaps, because John was there and expected to suddenly 6 to 8 weeks after the White Album, this is suddenly expected to have 2/3 or 1/3 of an album written already, at least. And John, he used to. I think Paul used to write quicker than John. I think Paul.
You can see it with Paul though. There's stuff flowing out of him the whole time that you're there.
Yeah.
I'm just getting to. He's just brought in over that first weekend. He's come up with "Carry That Weight," but he's only got the chorus.
Yeah.
And he's suggesting it as a song for Ringo. But as he sits at the piano and he bangs out that, he then drifts into one version of a verse, and then he stops, and then they have a chat about something else, and he comes back and starts again, and then he does a completely different idea for a verse, and it's just pouring out of him ideas.
Yes.
John was a more, if you listen to the way that John demoed, he worked from a concept or an idea, a subject,
yeah,
or all the words, and worked backwards from there, and he kind of almost forced the tunes out. The music didn't flow as naturally with him, so you would often get recognizable words, but to a different tune on some of his demos because he's trying them out for size.
Yep.
And I think at this point, though, he's involved in his kind of art stuff with Yoko, isn't he? And he's taken his eye off the ball a bit. So 8 weeks isn't. He'd been in India and written all of that material in roughly about the same period in the previous year. And that's probably the last really productive period of his whole life, actually.
Except for the last weekend.
That, well, yeah.
To a degree.
Yeah, I said one like concerted, 16, 18, whatever tunes just came out of him. But he's got very little because I don't think he's been putting the work in. It's as simple as that.
No.
And I think maybe this whole film idea was kind of dropped on him when he wasn't ready. Maybe that infamous quote where he said Paul would phone up and say, "I've got my 10 songs. We start on Tuesday," and he'd be like, "Hold on a minute, I've got to write something." But he does waste time. I mean, he had the whole weekend after the series at the moment finishes on the Friday. He'll have that whole weekend to have come up with something else, and he hasn't. So he's preoccupied, I think.
Yeah. So perhaps there's a bit of irritation there with John,
yes.
Because George is there with all this material, and Paul is there with all of this material, and John's there with nothing.
But I think George, to an extent, undermines himself. Whether he can we haven't grown up with those guys, so we can't. We're not picking up the same. Our antenna isn't picking up the same cues that maybe he is about their interest in his material. But he loses. He spent all that time on All Things Must Pass on Friday, and then he starts to bring in new material again on the following day, like he's changed his mind. And he does that a lot. He just, I don't know. He doesn't seem to have the commitment. He doesn't have the forceful personality that Paul has to push everybody through all the changes in the song to learn it. See what I mean? It's it's not in his nature to be that. He's kind of passive aggressive in a way. You know, it would be simpler if he just said what he wanted.
This is Dave of Live Life Loud, the Decibelic podcast, and you're listening to Pods Like Us with Marv.
It's a position that he's got used to over the years of being the third wheel, shall we say.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think he has confidence in his own material, and there's some wonderful new songs coming in there.
Yeah, but they come out with a nasty comment about one of his songs, though, don't they? I think.
Is that the I Mean Mine when he brings that in?
Or is
something
it
about?
Didn't they say something about was the song of his Window or something where they were taking the mickey out of that song or something?
Oh,
is that during these sessions or is that during another session?
I don't know. I haven't come across that. I am pretty much going through this at the same pace as everybody else.
Okay.
So, but that's the kind of intention of it, and that leads me down blind alleys sometimes. But I've kind of made up my mind that I'll relentlessly just keep going forward. So if I make an assumption and make a mistake, I just correct it when I find out about it.
Because you've done that already, where you've on one of your shows you begin the show by explaining where you've realised something from a previous episode that you hadn't quite got it right, so then you'll make that correction in a later episode.
Yeah. I figured rather than I could go round and round in circles, taking things down and re-editing them and all that kind of stuff. Or I'll sometimes I've not checked myself. You know, you think you know everything in this story, and sometimes it's the truth is different to what you assumed. And you'll discover that later and think, I relied too much on my memory on that one. But yeah, where were we going with that? We started off with George's wealth of material, weren't we? But yeah, they were. So I haven't got to them doing that. I know that John has a sort of excuses himself from performing I Mean Mine when they do that. He doesn't like that one at all.
No.
Which must be quite demoralising. But I've been in kind of sort of creative partnerships with people where you were able to be honest like that. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and you shouldn't look at it like that. It's not a democracy; it's a meritocracy, isn't it? And so if you make a suggestion and someone doesn't like it, they should just say.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And so, and that's the same with them. That they're thinking of the ultimate goal, which is to make make successful commercial material. So, and I've done that. I've spent ages trying to write a song, and someone's come in and said, "Well, I didn't like that one, but I like this one." And you're like, "Oh, I spent ages on that." But
yeah, but then I've normally gone back and reworked it to make it something to then bring back to them in a different way. To a band,
and then
we've done it that way before, and they've said,
exactly,
now that you've changed this, and this, I actually like this a lot better, and it works better.
Exactly. So that's the creative process. I don't think there's any harm in them. I mean, on the 6th, George is coming in with "Hear Me, Lord," and no one's interested in that.
No,
he has several goes at trying to play that, and everyone's talking over him. So. he's not as able to push himself forward. I mean, Paul is the best one at that.
I mean, if it have pushed it further, the All Things Must Pass, because they were getting into the song. If it had pushed that a bit further, we might likely have had a Beatles album called All Things Must Pass.
Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, they've got the thing worked out. I think there's a few. It's his own lack of confidence in that, because he fiddles about with the guitar for a great long period on that as well, because he doesn't like the guitar sound.
Yeah,
which isn't the most pressing concern at the moment when you're trying to teach your bandmates the song. But there's a bit of self-confidence issue there that he's trying to distract himself a little bit, or change the subject. It's this guitar, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the psychology of that, really.
The problem that they've got straight away with that is the fact that if they'd have if they'd have forgotten the whole idea of it being based upon leading up to a concert format, that's the one thing that caused a problem, because that song works better with a rhythm guitar that's acoustic, but because they were looking towards it being for a live performance, acoustics wouldn't work in a live performance as well back in those days. Whereas if they were thinking in terms of it just being for a potential album, then they could have just carried on working with the song with the acoustic as the rhythm instrument and going at it from that angle. It would have worked better, and they could have carried on with the song and add it as on the album.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that you overhear John saying in the tapes, is that he's just been on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus recording, and they play, I think is No Expectations, they play on acoustic.
Yeah.
And what he said is they couldn't get it to work through the PA in the studio, so they ended up recording it just to mics, and the audience couldn't really hear it.
Yeah.
So that was the compromise. So, and that was the situation when they do try and mic up George's guitar, he ends up getting a shock off the mic, doesn't he?
I mean, it's irritating in a way, because a couple of years later, when you'd have Concert for Bangladesh, they were able to actually have acoustic instruments heard by the audience. So it was only a couple of years later when you actually had the equipment to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's the PA they're using at the moment. That they're using like a Fender PA, and where you can hear sometimes, because what's going into the feed is the mics for the soundtrack. It's not the mics going through the PA system and coming back. It's just a mic. There's two mics taped together, and one's going directly into the tape. So you hear a nice clean sound. But on those occasions where you get one of the what they call them, the tape operator or whatever, making a slate, this is 15 take 4 or whatever, you can hear the band over the PA then, and it's distorted to death.
Yeah.
The sound, and I think there was circulating YouTube of the sound of the rooftop concert from the ground, and that is distorted as hell.
It is.
Yeah. That's the quality of live sound at the time, and it was, as you say, about to improve tremendously over the next couple of years.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is Greg at Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to Pods Like Us with Marv, and down with monarchy.
I mean, as far as I can tell, and what I've read, a lot of film sets, they would have a recorder on set, because even for most, even non-music related films, you would not record the dialogue for them on the set. You would go into a studio and re-record, re-record it and loop it in the studio. So what would happen would be that a lot of film sets, you'd have a recorder there with a real tape on, and just basic mics there to pick up everything, so that then in the studio, when they went to re-record the audio, they would play the audio as it is or as it was on the studio set for the actor or the voiceover person to then copy essentially the phrasing and how the line was delivered. And that was the same equipment that you're listening to now on the Nagra reels, which is the recording tapes that were for the recording the film company.
Is the film sound, yeah. It's not. Now it seems, and it'd be interesting with the box set and everything, and the documentary that's coming out, is if there was any recordings made, because they've had a load of new equipment delivered, which Glyn Johns has cobbled together from several sources, because we were in Britain in 1969 and there just wasn't a wealth of studios willing to give up tape recorders, regardless of who wanted them, if they were using them for something else. So he's got together what looks like consoles from Abbey Road, the mixing desks. The preamps for the actual where the mics get plugged into come from IBC, and a tape recorder that's borrowed from the Beatles themselves. Yep. So it'd be interesting to know if anything was ever recorded there at Twickenham, because it's there from virtually the third day all the equipment's arrived. So it was all set up ready to go. And I wonder if he actually recorded anything in any kind of multi-track form.
Well, officially, I'm going to say this now, because I've been saying it on some chat groups before. I think that after the Disney Plus show comes out, there will be a release musically for basically a soundtrack for that album, essentially. I mean, for that film, for that documentary.
Yeah. That'd be interesting. So yeah, we've just had Let It Be come out, which is Let It Be with the violins turned down a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that isn't really connected to this Get Back project as such, is it?
No.
It is. It's a result of it, but in effect, it's just the same album that it always was, but given a bit of a polish. So yeah, it'd be interesting if there is other material there.
I think at some point, say maybe in January, there'll be a release musically that's related to the Peter Jackson documentary film.
There are some. Especially when they're running through old favourites at Twickenham, there's some lovely recordings there. Things like Hitchhike and Your True Love, they do a Carl Perkins song. And they do it with such affection.
Yes.
And enthusiasm. And it's lovely to listen to. I mean, obviously I have to chop all that out. But yeah, it'd be nice to hear some of those polished up, because it's got a tremendous atmosphere about it.
You're sending me down another tangent now, Nick. You've done it again.
I'll do that.
Yep. The Carl Perkins thing. I've always loved the fact that all four of them had such a great rapport with Carl, and they all loved each other. Carl loved all four of them, and they loved him. I always thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, he had the misfortune to be around at the same time as Elvis. I think that was really his bad luck, really, because he wasn't that kind of performer, but he was a tremendous writer of songs. I used to have a vinyl collection of his as well, and there was a lot of brilliant recordings there. And again, there's some records that got such a wonderful feel to them, haven't they?
They have, and there's something about his songs that are, oh dear me, there's one that Paul does a cover version of, and I can't remember which one it is, but he's talking about a real thing where where Carl was writing about. He would pick up his girlfriend, who ended up becoming his wife, on the back of his own horse that he had, and then they would actually ride to the cinema and go and watch films. And he actually used to pick her up on his horse and take her there, and then I forgot what the name of the song is now.
That's not Movie Mag, is it?
That's exactly what it is. It's Movie Mag. And that is such a fantastic story that, you'd think, really, but it's actually a true story as well. And there's something about Carl's writing that is so incredible. The famous one would be the Blue Suede Shoes song. Which is unfortunate for Carl that he had that accident that he had, and then Elvis released it first, even though Carl recorded it first.
Yeah, but it goes back to the bit how much repertoire the Beatles had.
Yeah,
which to say they were walking musical encyclopedias, weren't they? I mean, you listen to even how the faithful versions of Dylan tunes that George is picking out on the guitar.
Yeah.
And he just seems to know them all perfectly. So they were definite. They weren't just obviously creative musicians. They were tremendous music fans.
Yeah. But then even there with Bob, you've got the one where Bob had a great rapport with three of them, but there always used to be a sort of thing between him and John.
Yeah, a rivalry.
Yeah.
And I dare say that put his nose out of joint that George had written with Dylan, when John could barely get a conversation. They were so guarded, weren't they, with each other?
Yeah.
They would. It reminds me a little of the conversation they try and have with Peter Sellers when he walks on set, and it's so stilted, and all they can do is trade quips. No one says, "Hello, how you doing?" It's, busy. How's the film going? There's none of that. Everyone's trying to be funny, and that's the same with John and Dylan. He's intimidated by him, and he's trying to upstage him.
Yeah, and all John's doing is just quoting bits from the Goons and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's strange that he couldn't just communicate on a personal level.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris from the podcast Real Film Reviewed, and you're listening to Marv on Pods Like Us.
So anyway, getting back to the show itself. So how do you actually record the show then, and then edit it, and then you've got the music for the show and the clips as well? I mean, how do you do all this stuff?
It's simpler than it sounds, to be honest with you. It's two iPhones, and everything's mixed through GarageBand. So some of the incidental music, and I'm doing that. Someone actually gave it my only 1-star review. I'd like to point out was that he didn't like the music scores underneath the different sections. But part of the reason I do that is because there's a tremendous amount of background hiss. And which I don't mind. I don't mind a bit of hiss myself. I quite like lo-fi. A lot of those, some of that's library music, which I've got hold of. There's some nice sort of bass lines and things that I've looped from the front of some kind of jazzy elevator music. And then there's some other ones that are just Apple loops that I've pieced together.
Granny music.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, some of those songs when they start with this funky bit of bass, and then when the mellow sax comes in and the strings, you think, oh dear, it wasn't what I expected it to be. But I'll keep that little bit. So yeah, I mean, it's because I enjoy making music anyway, so I just sort of piece together some loops and chop out, very much like the theme, which was a loop, and I just chopped out a bit of it that I like. It was a much longer piece. And then I overlaid some bits of soundtrack from that.
I thought you'd done it yourself. I did the music.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do now with just a phone, isn't it? Yeah, even some of the bass lines which sound really nice, they're not me.
So when you
I
record
don't play with a plectrum.
No. Dear me. So recording the show then, do you do it in bits and bobs, or do you do it all in one go and then edit accordingly?
Yeah, it's in sections. I work in. I mean, my initial thing will always be to go through the audio and find the part I want to listen to, and I try to make them at least a bit standalone. So if there's a theme, that's why they're all different lengths. If there's if they're diverted by, for instance, going back through some old songs from 1960, then that's the theme of the show. So I'll stay on them until they finish doing that. Yeah. And then I pick out the bits I want to talk about, and I do my research then and write my features. And sometimes they become quite large things in themselves. And I like to do it in a way that tells the story, because as I may have said before, because the Beatles exist in their own universe. Yeah. They refer to themselves all the time. They even make jokes that refer to their own songs, Or when here we go, Shyama Sundara, the Hare Krishna,
yes,
guy who's there on the first day, and John goes to Paul, "Who's that funny little man?" Which is a quote from A Hard Day's Night, and I think that's lovely that they make jokes in their own world. So from there, obviously, you can tell a broader story. You can tell more about the times and more about their history, and they prompt you to do it because that's how they talk. So that in itself is interesting. So yeah, I write 2, 3, or 4 features to go in to insert into the audio, and I always start with a recap.
Yeah.
Just so that you're not coming into it completely cold. You know what's happened before, and if you missed one, or you don't want to go back through the previous series, you've got a rough idea what we're doing.
I like the fact that when you start the show, you give people a suggestion as well for another podcast to listen to, or I think you did a YouTube as well recently as well, where you suggested a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I've got. I'm a lover of podcasts, and they keep me company. I go running in my spare time, and they keep me company when I do that. Or if I'm doing any other job, a podcast is great for. If you want to wash the car, or you want to do a bit of work around the house or something, it's perfect for that. And you can feel yourself, learning new information. I'm a big fan of YouTube as well. I think there's content on there that you're never going to encounter on normal TV documentaries. People have gone into amazing detail on stuff. I found the story, funnily enough, is now coincidentally someone had come up with the same idea, because there's a book called Finding Fretless, which I recommended as well, which is about the Bartel fretless guitar that George got hold of. Yeah. And I found the story of that on YouTube, because the trick seems to be with research, if anyone wants a tip, is to not actually look. You have to look at it from an angle. You can't say George Harrison's fretless guitar, you won't find anything. But if you start looking at what you thought you knew, I think it was, I can't remember, it was claimed to be produced by a different company, Hohner. So I looked for it there, and then I started to find threads that led out to the Bartel company. Yeah. And eventually there was the small documentary someone had made about that, which I think probably about 4 people had watched. But there it is. someone had gone through all that trouble. So yeah, big fan of all of that. And listening to a lot of there's a number of podcasts that have influenced what I do, which aren't necessarily musical ones, but I wanted to have something that was more of a kind of documentary style than someone just dryly talking, or two blokes having a conversation, which is a common format, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So I wanted mine to be sound a little more produced, even though, as I say, it's produced on an absolute shoestring onto iPhones, but it has a certain amount of production value to it. So, yeah.
So do you record the inserts separately? Do you actually go through your commentary first and then record the inserts separately, or is it all done as you go? Is it all done in one go?
No. It's all kind of scripted. So I've gone through the audio and I've made my comments there.
Yeah.
And as I might have said, occasionally I'll spot something when I'm editing it all together. The worst part of the job is to put together the commentary, because you're stopping and starting the audio all the time. So you need to do a lot of tiny edits of tiny sections of audio, and it on your timeline on your screen, it looks incredibly complicated, and you can make one mistake on that and move the whole lot.
Yes.
A couple of millimeters to the left and the whole thing's out of sync. But I record all of the individual features, the little song analyses and the little historical things and bits about the equipment and the history of the people. They're all done separately. And then I basically export them as individual sections and edit them together as one whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's really clever how you're doing it as well, because when you do that, it does sound like it's different as well. Like it's almost like a film, where you'll have a film that goes through different periods in time. So it's almost like, so you are given a different affectation or sound to when you're doing those inserts, as opposed to how you sound with the commentary.
Yeah, I've tried to give them all their own little background music, really. Well, sometimes I'm stuck and I have to think of a new one. But and one of them I didn't like. There used to be a piano one, but when you uploaded it sounded awful because the fidelity had gone down. So that's been replaced with some strings now. But the idea being that you keep people's interest if you keep altering the sound a bit. So I don't even mind. Sometimes when I'm talking to you here on the little headphone mic that comes with your phone.
Yeah.
And normally I talk into a nicer quality mic, but if I'm chucking an extra piece in, I'll use that because it changes the way it sounds, and it's enough that it captures your attention. Maybe it's a bit of variety.
Yeah, I remember I went into the studio once and I did a recording. I took because I still use the 4-track recorder to do demos at home.
Wow.
My little 4-track.
Have you still got that working with a cassette in it?
Yes, I still use it, yeah. And so I've gone into the studio before, and I remember once when I went into the studio and I took the 4-track with me, and the engineer just said to me, he said, "Do you know what?" He says, "I don't want you to re-record any of this." He says, "Because I like it as it is."
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. And the only thing that ended up happening was basically the person who I got doing the lead vocal, all he did was just put his lead vocal down over all the parts that I'd done. I mean, that's even including the bounce tracks, because the thing with 4-track is, especially with tape cassette or whatever, the more that you bounce, the fidelity or the sound gets altered as well. So it's not quite as crisp. It's not quite as crisp.
Sometimes that's the effect you're going for as well, isn't it? I mean, you could do it with thinking to back in the day, you used to do it with vocals, and you could take two people singing into a mic and overdub them again, and somehow it would squash them a little bit and clean it up a bit, so that you sounded much more sort of polished. It would do something magic.
That's exactly what happened, because I'd bounced down because there was only me at home doing this. So I've got myself doing these like la 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 type things in the background. And I thought, right, I've done that there. Then I do it again. So I've double tracked that, and then I've done a 3, then a 4. And I think ended up going all the way up to 6.
Mm.
So you've got all these 6 that are all comped onto one, comped down to one track. So because of the loss each time from doing over and over and over and over again and bouncing them all down, it actually cleaned it up in a sense and made me sound like a better singer than I really am.
Yeah, see, it's there's a certain magic to tape, isn't there? It has a quality to it. Here's a question for you. What inspired you then for home recording? Had that anything to do with Mark Lewison's book, the recording sessions?
Oh no, actually, I'd not read that at that point. I'd had a 4-track from the early 90s. I mean, initially, even before that, funnily enough, I was doing this strange thing where I had a dictaphone, and I'd record to a dictaphone on a proper size cassette, and then in the room that I was in, I would then take that cassette, put it into my stereo, and then put another cassette into the dictaphone.
Oh, tape to tape.
And then I'd play that on the stereo and start recording, and then I'd do the other part so that it's picking up what's on the stereo, and then me overdubbing there. And I kept doing that, and that's how I started doing it. Was doing it that way with the dictaphone and the stereo. I
remember doing that as a kid,
then I went up from that to having a 4-track Tascam in about 91, 92, I think.
You made me think of that tape to tape. We had used to do that with a friend, and we'd try and make demos at home, but we did it tape to tape. And then if we wanted to overdub, because of the difference in speed between the two tape machines, you had to tune your instruments up higher for the second.
You had to slightly change the guitar.
So you go up a semitone and then do it again. You've got to do another semitone. It's getting higher and higher. So it's just, you tell that the kids today, they'd not believe you.
No, they wouldn't. Or just use a capo.
Yeah, that's another way around it. I never thought of that.
So, do you if you've not come across any problems with rights then on using this material?
Not yet. Because I'm avoiding the music. There's 2 reasons for that, though. I mean, one, you're going to hear the same songs a million times, and also and it tends to break up the narrative, which the point I'm interested in is the conversations, because that's explaining what's happening. So I tend to, as best I can, chop out the music unless there's conversation going on during it.
Yeah.
I might fall foul of when we've got now we're going to have a documentary. A lot of the dialogue is going to be obviously
copyrighted
material. Yeah. So that, but so far I'm okay. I mean, it's not my intention to produce anything that's going to damage their sales on their product. I don't think we're releasing anything like the same kind of product, to be honest.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Brian with Concerts That Made Us podcast, and you're listening to Pods Like Us, a great show about other great shows.
I was thinking earlier that it's a shame, really, that book's come out that you're on about, the new Get Back book, which incidentally I've had a message to tell me it's arrived. So I've got to go and pick that up.
Enjoy.
I will, thank you. But it's a shame, really, that you've got that there with the bits that have the explanations at the side, because I was thinking it'd be great if you could take this that you're doing as a podcast and then convert it to a book.
I was looking at the 6 pads of writing that I've so far worked my way through here. It was a gigantic amount of, it's all handwritten. I'm thinking that before, that maybe at the end of all of this that I could turn it into something, because you're building on work. You've obviously, Soapy's book, there's the They May Be Parted website as well, which is also analysing this and is a great source for explaining things and the history of stuff. You'll also have this book, and it's not perfect.
Yep.
Some of the transcriptions there, I pointed one out straight away, and I'll probably find others that I beg to differ on what they've transcribed. The first one I spotted was Paul is asking, Paul, when they say what key are you in, they're talking about the pitch so they can get in tune. Yep. So he wants to know, what note are you playing? Is that E? So he can go and tune his bass up. And but he means pitch. He doesn't mean key.
Yep.
But at the end of that conversation, Paul says, I'll have to come up to you or something. And George says, maybe we should come down to you in pitch. Maybe you're right and we're wrong. But John then says, no, I think we're about concert, as in concert pitch, which is the pitch that all instruments in an orchestra tune to. But in the book, it says, I think we're about constant. So, you see, I think I'm right.
So do I.
Why would he say constant? That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. No. I mean, that makes perfect sense saying concert, because, like you said, that's the way that they, all the orchestrated instruments are
They have that kind of a musical vocabulary, a kind of timpanelli musical vocabulary. They always refer to middle section of a song as a middle eight, which is supposed to be an 8-bar section, but often their middle eights aren't 8 bars long.
They're very often 16.
Yeah, or they're not a middle eight at all. I think he refers to In My Life, the section that goes, all these places had their moments, which is basically another verse.
Yeah.
But he says, Paul helped me with the middle eight, and that's which isn't a middle eight. It's just a verse in it with some different chords. Yeah. So yeah, they had that they had a limited kind of an old style musical vocabulary. So I think he would have said concert pitch.
Yeah, like you said, they had their way of talking or speaking that a lot of people might not pick up on. So, but you'd have people like Mal who were in the clique who would understand precisely what they were on about when they'd say things.
Oh yeah, George in particular has this peculiar Spike Milligan wordplay thing going on a lot of the time when he talks about one of the ones you haven't heard yet. He talks about Son House, who's playing a resonator guitar, which he says, he's got one of them guitars with a big dustbin lid on the front of it. So there's a lot of things like that. When he says, we got in the PA, they've got one of those big deaf aids, he says.
Oh, yes.
Meaning an amplifier.
Yeah.
And isn't that weird? It's like, it's just wordplay the whole time. Yeah. But it's quite idiosyncratic because the others don't do it.
That explains that line now that they use in the album.
Yeah.
Charles Autry and his deaf aids. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be a slang term that George is using for an amplifier. It's very strange.
Absolutely.
So, and this is what I was saying when I was trying to write about the Beatles. You needed to find their voices, and they talk in their own peculiar way.
It's so funny that. So, we'll just quickly touch on this here. I mean, it does. I don't think, because like I said, I mean, I think it's the end for the Beatles didn't, unofficially happen for a fair while after this until September of '69, unofficially.
Yeah, there's some funny conversations though, isn't there? There's they do talk about do we just break up now? There's a bit of that going on in a kind of matter of fact way. Are they looking to? And I would venture to guess that that's something to do with Cream.
Okay.
That Cream split while they're ahead. They stayed together for 2 years and they quit at the peak. And perhaps that's what's in the air. As John says at one point, why don't we come straight from this and we'll go straight in the studio while the motivation's still there.
Yeah.
And we'll make an album and then split. Now he's not sure whether he means split as in get out of here, in sort of 60s slang, or whether he means they split up. But it seems to be in the air that maybe, doesn't Paul say at one point we'll do it like a news show and then the last article will be the Beatles have split up?
Yeah.
So the idea that they could make their ending an event, I think it does it is a bit inspired by the way that Cream managed their career.
Yeah, because actually that's a good point, because you had the Goodbye album by Cream, which was basically, it was exactly what it was called. It was the Goodbye. It was the farewell.
They made their breakup a whole event. They toured it and then they did some farewell shows and they released an album, and used it as a way of making money, making as much publicity out of it as possible. And the Beatles kind of, sputtered out in a way.
Yeah, where in a sense, what John was suggesting there, which they ended up doing with the Abbey Road album, if it had ended at that point with the Abbey Road album, and in a sense, that would have worked better in the same way as Goodbye worked for Cream. But unfortunately,
they released
so many months later, you've got the Let It Be album, and they've had to all come back together when they don't really want anything to do with each other. So you've got that animosity there, where when there's that picture of them in the film, in the watching the film in the theater. in the theater. And you can tell that they really do not want to be in the same room as each other, especially none of them want to be with Paul.
Mm. Yeah, so, he's at the back, isn't he?
Absolutely, yep. But, if that had not have happened, then the ending of the Beatles would possibly have been better.
Yeah, tidier. Didn't George say in Anthology that the idea of Abbey Road was to finish it up and make it tidy?
Yeah. Which it would have done.
And I think the problem with the Get Back thing and Let It Be is it left a sour taste in everyone's mouth, I think. And again, it's influenced by events afterwards, isn't it? It's not a representation of January 1969. It's a representation of April 1970.
Yes. Yeah.
And how they were with each other at that point. From what I can see of the clips for the new documentary, there's a lot more John in this documentary.
Yeah, definitely.
Which changes completely everyone's perception of him as being strung out and uncommunicative and all of that. Whether he had enthusiasm for writing new material is a different thing, really. He still enjoyed playing music.
He did, but I mean, even after the Beatles, I've had conversations with people about John, and I've said that in some ways, I think that John needed to. From a creative point of view, as a musician, I think he needed to work on Yoko's material, because then there wasn't such a thing on him trying to make his own songs sound a specific way, and he could actually let loose on the instrument as a musician on Yoko stuff, as opposed to being a creative person. It could just be the musician and the guitarist in the background.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. It's a shame he didn't pursue a lot of that, because on those, probably from Revolver onwards, there was always an out there John track on the albums, wasn't there? And he didn't really do anything with that when he got into his solo career. No, I always thought that was a shame, really, about his solo missed career. Opportunity, really. That was something he should have done more of. Absolutely.
Hey, this is Jack from Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to my man Marv, Pods Like Us.
So where does your show logo come from then, Nick?
That's that is a picture of a Nagra recorder there. It's very much the type that they would have used on the sessions. You were saying you had a tape recorder, reel to reel at home. I'd have loved something like that. I think they're wonderful looking bits of kit, aren't they? They are. It takes me back to Mission Impossible or something like that.
It's funny because I was doing this picture, the picture that's on the notes, and Louise actually said to me when she looked at it, she said, "Well, that tape self-destruct in 10 seconds." Yeah. Yeah, it's do you know what? There's talk about YouTube. There's a channel called Techmoan. He might help you if your 4-track ever breaks down, because he's good at restoring old audio equipment, which is fascinating. He finds all these obscure formats and gets the machines working again. But one of the episodes he did was on the Mission Impossible tape recorder. Okay. And the fact that it's not always the same one. So there's something for you to dig into. There's another recommendation, Techmoan. Brilliant, Techmoan. Is it called Techmoan, you say? Tech?
Yeah, I don't know where he got that from, but he's a very engaging kind of presenter, I suppose.
Absolutely.
He's just got a nice way about him, so I can happily sit there and watch them. Watch a guy taking audio bits to pieces. It's a strange way to relax.
It is. Right, I'm pulling the curtain away here just to say that I've had a message from Ed Chen to say, "Are you ready to do my show now?"
No, I told you I'd waffle on. How far are we from the end, do you think?
Not far. I think we're going into the last few bits now, because we've touched on everything else. Yeah, but needless to say, what you were saying, I think the end of the Beatles was an inevitability. Really?
Well, it was going to end sometime, wasn't it? I think, when they were at the height of it, and they'd grown up really together. They'd been teenagers when they were first together, at least 3 of them anyway. And they'd been through all of that, and then this whole thing had just blown up completely out of proportion. But they were all, together as friends, and they have a sort of perfect arc to their story in that sense. But eventually, they grew up, and they began to see a life outside of just being in that band. Yeah. So inevitably, I think George couldn't have continued inside the group. I think he was, doesn't he say? He says on my, here we go, another little reference to the podcast, but on the intro music, he says, "I think I've got enough songs for the next 10 years."
Yeah. But I think Paul was the same, though, in a way. I think, looking back on it, Paul had too many ideas at this point, and so did George. So there was an inevitability that they would have to do that for their own creative progression. That they would have to do that because there was too much material from those two, at least.
Yeah, they both Purple Patch, hadn't they? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's very. As I say, the way that music just flows out of Paul.
Yeah.
Literally pours out of him. As you see, one of the loveliest things I think on the when you listen to all the audio, is Get Back just being birthed from strumming a couple of notes on the bass.
Yeah.
He's playing one note, and that song just emerges out of thin air. So that's the same with George. I mean, he'd go home and then come in the next day and say, "I've written another song."
Yeah, because Paul, like you said, it'd come in and go, well, this is the basis for Golden Slumbers. They'd have there was a variation of Every Night in there apparently, and Another Day. I think he was playing some bits of that. I had Maxwell's Silver Hammer, unfortunately. Some people might think. I don't mind the song personally.
Well, as we gone through it there's a lot of other ways that song could have gone. They were trying lots of different things, and it may not have been quite so predictable. It may have been a bit more satirical. It ended up being kind of like Schlager, that kind of umpire music, and it had potential to be a different kind of song altogether.
I actually did a guest spot on Ed Chen's show before, when They Was Fab, and we were talking about the sound of songs of music hall and vaudeville, and I was saying to Ed, because I had the ukulele with me at the time, and I was going through some of the songs, and so I said to him, for instance, Maxwell is actually a variation of exactly that. I said it's just that the way that they were pushing the song in that session wasn't really the right arrangement for it. Whereas if he'd have done it in an old style, a bit like, When I'm 64 and Honey Pie and things like that, it works better that way than it did the way that it did, that they put it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the production of it and everything doesn't help it at all, really.
Yeah, it's more George Formby than Ray Charles.
Yeah. Yes.
So what other podcasts do you listen to then, Nick? Here we go, long list.
Well, yeah. Okay, I won't bore you entirely, but amongst my favourites, Nothing Is Real for the Beatles, I think is excellent.
Yep.
And I love the chemistry between the two presenters. I think that's brilliant. Another one actually mentioned me, unbelievably, Sail On, the Beach Boys podcast.
Yes, that's a great podcast.
Their section on, for inspiration for that show, but their section on the whole Smiles thing with the, the level of research or forensics, I think, when they talk about the Beach Boys Christmas album.
Yeah.
Now, Beach Boy fans have managed to find out that the tape that was reused from another session, and you can hear bleed through, believe it or not, of another track from the tape, and it comes out on the album. And they found out what it was, which is astounding.
Wow.
I think that's how can anyone have actually done that? But they've obviously found the original jazz recording or big band recording that they taped over, which is amazing. There's another one, really the one that inspired me for the way that the format of how I work is something called Murder Mile, which is it's a guy who does those kind of murder sightseeing tours around London, and lives on a boat, and he presents a kind of I can't remember, it's monthly or something like that, but there's a podcast there, but he does it with the same kind of idea of using multiple voices and background ambience and music and all of that. So that's really the inspiration for how I've planned out the way that I work. screw it, we're going to talk about the Beatles is hilarious, invariably. And that's just a bunch of guys who freely admit they don't know everything. But the amount of in-jokes in that, sometimes you're crying with laughter. Yeah. There's obviously something about the Beatles and Beatles Naked. You'll find a lot of there's a tremendous amount of knowledge in there, and they go into areas that you wouldn't necessarily think of. But as we know, this subject, for a band that were only really working for 7 years, there's such a density of information, and you can pick any brief period and talk about it for hours, which is extraordinary because they were just so busy.
Yeah, as we mentioned, there were times where they'd hardly have any time away from actually doing anything.
Yeah, it's She Loves You. It's something I was looking at for this one I'm working on. I've got my notes in front of me. Now, She Loves You was recorded on the 1st of July 1963, but was written on the 26th of May by John and Paul in the room at the Turks Hotel in Newcastle, in between performances, the matinee and the evening performance, at the city's majestic ballroom. They wrote that massive hit. Wow. I think that's amazing. Yeah, so
it is.
There aren't, and the fact that people know that is just fantastic, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
It must be weird being Paul McCartney, thinking all these people know exactly where you were on what day.
Yeah, I certainly couldn't do that.
Hey, it's Gil from the Mind Podcast. Today's mind culture and social podcast. And you're listening to Pods Like Us.
But I think we need, I think there's a not a need. I mean, it's only us people who really care, I suppose. But you can't really rely on the remaining Beatles themselves to give you the definitive history, because one, memory is faulty, but also the tale's been told so many times that it's often been tidied up to appear more interesting, or at least easier to tell. So you get things that we're discovering as we go through this these tapes. That as I was saying earlier, the narrative is that they go into Apple Studios and find that the studio isn't built and they have to get in all this equipment at the last minute. All that equipment was already there.
Yeah.
Because the intention was to record the show at Twickenham. So they'd already got all the equipment. They really hadn't got any concerns about the Apple Studio, apart from whatever they'd built didn't work. But it's an easier tale to tell, isn't it? To say, oh, then we went to Twickenham and it was a disaster.
Yeah,
what were we going to do? Inject a bit of drama. But in fact, they'd already solved that problem. So,
like I said, like I said, the 60s version of the Kardashians.
Well, there's another interesting thing comes out of from listening to Ceylon, that there's a Beach Boys myth that on the song they were doing for the Smile sessions, there's a song called Vegetables.
Yes.
And Paul McCartney is reported to have come on along to the session and been recorded crunching into celery or something.
Yep.
Now, you ask Paul that question in the 90s, and, all this stuff is freely accessible. And they point out that Paul denies it happened at all in the 90s. I don't know where they got that from. That never happened. Because the Beach Boys like to tell the tale, but he says, no, that never happened. But now You ask them about it. It's, oh yes, that's when I went to LA and I crunched celery on their recording, isn't it? You know, because it's a good story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that, you know, it's good publicity. It's not necessarily factual.
Nope.
So that's the service of when you're doing a little bit of scholarly work or digging in on the Beatles stuff. You are getting at least closer to the truth.
Absolutely. So, what advice would you give to people starting a podcast for the first time, Nick?
I would say know where you're heading. I think you have to have a plan. I'm fortunate in a way that I'm not doing a generic kind of a Beatles podcast where I have to keep thinking of subjects. This has got a beginning and an end. And, you know, I'm heading unstoppably, I'm going to be heading towards the final parts of these tapes, and then it will conclude. But have a plan, definitely, and don't overstretch yourself. Don't assume you're going to be able to produce something every week, because there's much more to it than you would anticipate, I think. Absolutely. In terms of the preparation and fitting in with your life, you know.
Yeah.
For instance, don't assume you'll be able to just stand in front of the mic and get all your words out properly, because you'd be amazed how you've forgotten how to pronounce words as soon as you start pressing record.
Yeah, you suddenly start pressing record and you can't talk properly.
It's red light fever, isn't it? So, it's like I've learned. I've noticed the kind of cadence of other people's on television, the way that they phrase words now, which is clearly where they've got the same problems where you run two vowels in together, which you can do normally in conversation, but when you're reading an auto cue, things with the in them become suddenly really difficult to get to the next word.
Yes.
Very strange. Yeah. Especially if it starts with a vowel, the other or something like that, or the alternative. Was it? I don't know why. It's anything like that. Yeah. You can't blur those words together. You end up mumbling them, so you have to do it again.
Yeah. You're almost self-edit. You're editing yourself as you're talking. That's another problem as well.
Yes. Yeah. You must never think when you're speaking. Don't pay attention to what you're reading. Although sometimes I come back and I think, oh, I've left out a whole word there and not even noticed. Yes, but it's been a steep learning curve, but it's been absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely, I've thought the same about myself. So, where can people find you and get hold of the show then, Nick?
You can get me on all of the regular platforms: iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, Podbean, etc. I think the only one I'm not on is Amazon Music. I just haven't bothered with that one.
Yeah.
I think it was more difficult to get on than the others. That's why I kind of give up. But learning how to do that was a revelation as well. It's quite involved, isn't it? Learning how to.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite pleased with my progress so far. Anyway.
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do, is it? Because you just think to yourself before doing this, you think, well, I'll put the podcast there and it's going to go to all these places. But no, there's all these little things that you have to do. Like you go to another page and go, well, I want it to go there. I want it to go there and to go there. And it's very time consuming, even that bit.
Yeah, that was it, RSS feed or something, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
You have to register all these different sites. But yeah, once you're there, it's great because it all magically happens, doesn't it? You know, you schedule yourself in and up it pops at the right time. Although I did have a weird thing where some of my episodes in season 1 just stopped coming through on iTunes and then they did again. And I think that was something to do with an Apple update. But if something goes wrong, I would not have a clue how to get it fixed.
No. I remember that actually. I had the same problem with my show when that happened. Apple had an upgrade and podcasts were not easy to get hold of for a bit.
Yeah, I had a few people complaining, but no, we're all back and running. We have season 3. I can't remember when. It's about another four weeks, I think.
That's perfect for the Get Back film coming out. Then.
Yeah, I'm thinking I might do a little short one on the book and what we know so far about the documentary, because I think that's fascinating.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it'll just be like a 10-minute thing. Just because I've got the book, I should have a look through it and pick out the best bits. I think it reads a little like what it reminded me of when I was a kid. I had the scripts for 40 Towers, and it had pictures of the show, and then the dialogue, and that's kind of how they laid it out. And I thought, well, I wonder if it's the script for the actual TV series, but apparently not. It's a standalone thing.
Did John Cleese write the book then that you got?
No, they literally the script's just put down, out with no context at all. They were just all the episodes just dumped in a book with some black and white stills.
Yeah. 40 Towers was written by John Cleese and his then wife Connie Booth.
Correct.
Anyway,
so take you back to the time they got paid £500 for their trouble.
Wow. If people want to work out how much that is now, off you go.
Yeah. Well, it's not a lot. Even back
today,
then, that's not a lot of money.
No. So what I shall do then is I'll put in the show notes. I'll put a what we call a pod follow link, and what that does is it takes people to the whatever they use to listen to podcast on. It will take it to that podcast provider's page for your show.
That's very clever.
It really, it was great when I discovered that. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I should look that up, because then I should post that on Twitter. But you can, everything is Winter of Discontent Pod if you want to find me on the social media, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the email is winterofdiscontentpod@gmail.com. So I like receiving emails. People tell their stories, and I've read a few of them out.
You have, yeah.
Because and I'd like that, because I'd like us all to kind of go through this stuff together. Sometimes I throw things I can't understand properly. I'll throw out to the listeners, and I hope that someone will twig what's being said, because we should all, work on this together. It's, I think it'd be nice to have a definitive version of exactly what went on.
Yeah,
because there's been a bit of misinterpretation, I think, over the years.
So do I. I like the fact that we are, to a degree, the listeners are going through all this at the same as you're going through it, even though we are about 3 weeks behind you.
Yes. Well, 3 episodes behind me.
6 weeks behind, so 3 episodes, yeah.
But that's why I've left a little bit of a longer gap, so I can get a couple more episodes under my belt before we come back. Because God forbid I should run out, I should get sidetracked by something and run out midway through a series. I'd hate to do that.
That's called life.
Yes, it does. It has a tendency to get in the way, most annoyingly.
It does. It really does. Anyway, I don't want to irritate Ed Chen and everybody else on the next show I'm recording.
Okay. Yes, do carry on. Thanks for having me. It's been,
Thank you very much.
Absolutely lovely.
Yep. So, thanks very much, Nick, for chatting with me. This was fun, and yes, I knew it would be great.
Oh, well, thank you very much for your support, Marv.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening, and I hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.